She was chained like a pet until a human shattered her bonds. Desire, betrayal, and a fight for freedom. This is humanity yeah. Nick Harper wiped a bead of sweat from his brow and cursed under his breath as he squeezed through the maintenance shaft of Nexus Station. The air was thick with the stench of industrial lubricants and alien spices, a pungent cocktail that clung to his nostrils no matter how much he tried to breathe through his mouth. The shaft was narrow, barely wide enough for his muscular shoulders to fit. Every time his tactical armor scraped the metal walls, it echoed with a metallic whisper that made his nerves tighten. Silence was his ally, but Nexus was a place where silence never lasted for long. He glanced at the holographic map flickering above his wrist. A soft, pale blue projection outlined the labyrinth of ducts and maintenance passages that crisscrossed the underbelly of the massive station. He wasn't supposed to be here. No sane mercenary would willingly crawl through the guts of a space hub infamous for being lawless and merciless. Nexus was a neutral trading post in theory, but in practice it was a breeding ground for smugglers, pirates, and black market warlords. The station existed on the consortium's fringes, just far enough to avoid its gaze, just close enough to profit from its shadow. Nick was no stranger to such places. His entire career had been defined by crawling into holes like this, dirty, dark, and dangerous. But this job was different. This job was supposed to set him up for years if he survived. The curator had been explicit. Retrieve the progenitor codex, a crystalline data artifact rumored to hold the technological secrets of a civilization that had vanished before most current species had crawled out of their primordial swamps. The codex wasn't just valuable, it was priceless. Whoever controlled progenitor tech could reshape the balance of galactic power. And Nick Harper, ex-soldier turned mercenary, had been chosen or perhaps manipulated to be the man who retrieved it. He shook the thought away. Philosophy didn't matter. Money did. And the curator's payment, if delivered, was enough to retire to a quiet moon and never crawl through another duct again. Still, there was an unease gnawing at him. The curator was a shadowy figure, a collector of dangerous relics, a man who seemed to know too much and reveal too little. Nick had worked for him twice before. Both times the job had been bloody, but profitable. This time, however, the scale felt different, bigger, riskier, like a storm building, just out of sight. The shaft opened into a junction. He paused, one knee pressing against the grating, and scanned for security measures. Motion sensors, tripwires, hidden drones, he'd seen them all before. His steel gray eyes narrowed as he studied the faint glimmer of a sensor line ahead. Smirking, he pulled a small emitter from his utility strap and tossed it down the opposite corridor. The device projected a false signal, tricking the sensor into registering movement elsewhere. The line blinked reset, and Nick moved past without a sound. "Should be right about here," he muttered. The codex was supposed to be stored in a private vault at the station's core, hidden behind crates of contraband and exotic tech. The station's gangs had been whispering about it for weeks, though no one had dared to attempt stealing it until now. Nick slid forward and reached the end of the shaft where a ventilation grate gave him a view of the chamber beyond. Through the slats, he spotted a dimly lit storage area. Crates of all shapes and sizes were stacked like tombstones, each stamped with alien markings he didn't recognize. Some pulsed faintly, suggesting they held unstable power cells or bioorganic tech. Others were reinforced with metallic bands that hinted at dangerous contents. At the center of the room on a pedestal sat a small, ornate box. Even from here, Nick could feel the hum of energy radiating from it. Jackpot. His voice was barely a whisper, but his lips curled into a grin. He lowered himself from the shaft with practiced ease, boots landing softly on the metallic floor. His scanner beeped in confirmation. The box matched the unique energy signature associated with progenitor artifacts. Carefully, reverently, he approached the pedestal. His gloved hand hovered over the box, his breath caught in his chest. One grab and the payday was his. But then something stopped him. A sound, faint, fragile, somewhere between a whimper and a sigh. Nick froze. Instinctively, his hand dropped to the grip of his sidearm, eyes scanning the shadows. He was supposed to be alone here. The curator's intel had been clear. No guards, no witnesses, no interruptions. Yet the sound came again, soft but unmistakable. His pulse quickened. He followed the noise weaving between stacks of containers until he reached a partition wall at the back of the chamber. Beyond it, he found something he hadn't expected, something that had nothing to do with his contract, yet everything to do with what would come next. A figure was chained to the wall, humanoid feminine, skin the color of shimmering pale blue, luminous even in the dim light. Silver hair cascaded down her back like liquid starlight. She wore a thin, dark gray bodysuit, little more than rags stretched over her frame, doing nothing to hide the bruises marring her delicate skin. An electronic collar pulsed with a malevolent glow at her throat, every flicker a reminder of control and cruelty. Her eyes, large violet and hauntingly beautiful, widened when they met his. Fear, disbelief, and hopeless resignation all swirled there at once. She recoiled as far as her chains would allow, the metal links rattling in protest. "Holy shit," Nick breathed, momentarily forgetting the codex behind him. This wasn't part of the mission. This wasn't supposed to be here. Yet she was real flesh and blood, suffering in silence, while the galaxy carried on above her. Nick felt something stir in his chest, something he thought long buried beneath layers of cynicism and mercenary pragmatism. He raised his hand slowly, palms open, showing he meant no harm. "Easy," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." Her eyes flickered with suspicion, then softened just enough to betray a spark of hope. Nick stepped closer, careful not to startle her. Up close, the bruises were worse than he'd realized. Some were old and faded, others fresh and angry. Whoever had put her here hadn't treated her as a person. She wasn't a prisoner. She was property. And Nick Harper hated slavers more than anything. "Who did this to you?" he asked. He didn't expect an answer, not from someone who looked so broken. But to his surprise, her lips parted and words spilled out in accented but clear standard. "My master," she whispered. "Krell Vorax. Smuggler. Slaver." She spat the name like poison, her eyes flashing with fury. Nick's jaw tightened. He knew the name. Everyone in this sector did. Krell Vorax was a reptilian warlord who trafficked in lives and relics, growing fat on the misery of others. If Vorax owned her, then she wasn't just a random victim. She was something more. "How long?" he asked quietly. "3 cycles," she murmured, "since my ship was taken." Her posture, the dignity still lingering in her bearing, despite the chains, told Nick everything he needed to know. She wasn't just anyone. She came from power, from heritage, from a life far removed from this filth. "You're not just anyone, are you?" A flicker of pride crossed her face. Her chin lifted, and she said with quiet defiance, "I was Aratir Vale, daughter of House Tyrevale." Her hand rose unconsciously to the collar, as if the weight of it mocked her every word. Nick exhaled slowly. In that instant, the mission changed. The codex still mattered, but so did she. He made a decision, reckless and irreversible. "I'm getting you out of here," he said, voice steady. Her violet eyes widened, disbelief etched across her bruised face. You really would free me?" "No one deserves this," Nick replied firmly. As he pulled a set of tools from his utility strap and knelt beside her, the station seemed to hum with unseen tension. Somewhere above them, alarms slept quietly, waiting to awaken. Somewhere beyond the walls, guards patrolled, ready to pounce. Somewhere in the dark corridors of Nexus Station, fate was shifting. Nick Harper had come to steal an artifact. Instead, he had found a chained woman whose rescue would ignite a firestorm across the galaxy, and he had chosen to act. Nick Harper's hands moved with precision, born of experience, yet his heart beat faster than it had in years. Kneeling before the chained, alien woman, he examined the collar without touching it, his gray eyes narrowing at the intricate circuitry pulsing across its surface. It wasn't a simple restraint. He recognized the design's sophisticated, cruel intended, not merely to bind, but to break. Collars like this were whispered about in mercenary circles, devices that suppressed will, rewrote impulses, stripped away identity, until the wearer became a compliant shadow of themselves. He'd seen prisoners wearing similar tech on the outer colonies. Men and women who had once been rebels, politicians, even soldiers. They had stared blankly, their souls smothered beneath layers of circuitry. That Aura could still speak, still spit Vorax's name like venom, meant she was stronger than most. 3 cycles, Nick muttered, inspecting the small panel at the collar's base. You should be a hollow shell by now. Guess you Lyrians have some steel in you. Her violet eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring again. Why help me, human? You gain nothing. You risk everything. Nick gave a wry smile, though his hands didn't pause. I've made a living taking risks, and I don't like slavers. Never have. The words were blunt, but behind them lay memories Nick didn't share, memories of friends lost to raiders of innocence, chained for profit while governments looked the other way. He had once been part of an army sworn to protect. That illusion had died with betrayal and corruption. Since then, he had lived for himself, guided only by instinct and the occasional shard of conscience. This right here was one of those shards. Ara studied him in silence, as though weighing the truth of his words. Then almost reluctantly, she nodded. Nick pulled a slim tool from his belt, its tip glowing faintly. He inserted it into the collar seam, feeling for the magnetic lock. The device resisted, humming like an animal unwilling to release its prey. Sweat beaded along his hairline as he worked the minutes, stretching the shadows around them, heavy with threat. Above them, somewhere in the station, a metallic groan reverberated through the walls. Nexus never slept. The sound might have been cargo moving or security patrols shifting. But to Nick, it felt like a countdown. Hold still, he murmured. This thing's nasty. I tripped the wrong circuit, and it could fry both our nervous systems. Her breath hitched, but she didn't flinch. For someone chained and brutalized, her composure impressed him. At last, a faint click echoed in the quiet. The collar shuddered, its malevolent glow dimming before flickering out entirely. With a grunt of satisfaction, Nick lifted it from her neck. Beneath the device, the skin was raw and red and ridged with faint scars. She raised trembling fingers to the spot, disbelief softening her features. You freed me. Nick pocketed the collar and extended his hand. Can you walk? She hesitated only a heartbeat before grasping his hand. Her skin was warm against his calloused palm, her grip surprisingly firm. Rising to her feet, she swayed, catching herself on his arm. Yes, she said. The collar suppresses, will not strength. My body is intact. Good, Nick replied, because we need to move. Fast. Behind them, the codex pulsed faintly on its pedestal, a reminder of the mission that had brought him here. Nick Cross quickly snatched the ornate box and slid it into a pouch on his belt. He didn't know exactly why the curator wanted it, but after what he'd just witnessed, he suspected the codex was far more than a relic. He returned to Era's side. There's a vent shaft above us. It'll be tight, but it's the cleanest way out. She nodded, though uncertainty flickered across her eyes. Still, she followed him without protest as he interlaced his fingers to give her a boost. For a woman who had spent 3 cycles in chains, her movements retained a fluid grace. She hoisted herself into the shaft, her silver hair trailing like starlight behind her, and Nick followed close, replacing the grate. Crawling through the ducts was harder with 2. Every sound seemed amplified, the scrape of his armor, the whisper of her breath, the rattle of chains she no longer wore, but still seemed to echo in her mind. Where are we going? She whispered. My ship, Docking Bay 17, Nick replied quietly. If we reach it before security locks down the hangars, we're gone. And if not, then we improvise. His tone was flat, but a ghost of a grin tugged at his mouth. She studied him in the dim glow of the emergency lights, her violet eyes luminous. You are reckless. Reckless keeps me alive. They crawled in silence, tension, a constant drumbeat in the cramped shaft. Then, without warning, alarms erupted throughout the station. The wail was shrill, animalistic, echoing off every corridor and duct. Red lights flared, bathing the metal walls in an ominous glow. Era flinched. They know. Maybe about the codex, Nick muttered. Maybe about you. Hell, maybe both. The shaft vibrated with the thrum of boots as security patrols rushed through the quarters below. Voices barked orders in a dozen alien tongues. The air grew hotter, heavier, as if the station itself anticipated bloodshed. Nick pressed on every nerve on edge. They reached a junction where the duct opened onto a corridor. Nick peered through the grate. Below, the hallway was empty, yet the rhythm of approaching footsteps made him freeze. He held up a hand, signaling Ara to wait. A squad of guards thundered past, weapons gleaming, armor clanking. They never looked up. When silence returned, Nick eased the grate open and dropped lightly into the corridor. He turned, the arms raised to catch Ara. She descended carefully, her weight light in his hands. For an instant, their faces were close, her breath brushing his cheek, her eyes searching his, as though for answers he couldn't yet give. "Thank you," she whispered. Nick cleared his throat and stepped back, suddenly aware of how intimate the moment had been. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this." They moved quickly, weapons ready every corner, a potential ambush. Nexus was a maze, and with alarms blaring, escape became a race against time. Then came the sound Nick least wanted to hear, slow, deliberate clapping. The echo rang down the corridor, mocking theatrical. Nick spun, placing himself between Era and the sound. From the shadows stepped a tall reptilian figure. Scale skin, mottled green and brown, adorned with ornate jewelry that gleamed in the red emergency lights. Yellow eyes glowed with malice. "Krell Vorax," Ara whispered, trembling yet defiant. Vorax's forked tongue flicked between jagged teeth. His smile or snarl was wide predatory. 4 armed guards flanked him, their weapons leveled. "I must admit," Vorax hissed, "I didn't expect a human mercenary to stumble into my nest. And certainly not to steal both my most valuable artifact and—" His gaze slid to Ara, lingering possessively. "My favorite pet." Ara stepped forward before Nick could stop her, her chin lifting proudly despite the fear in her eyes. "I am no one's pet. Your house is nothing but thieves and slavers. You dishonor the consortium with your very existence." Vorax's expression darkened. He sneered. "Bold words from someone who whimpered at my feet." Nick raised his weapon finger steady on the trigger. "She's not your possession. She's coming with me." The smuggler chuckled, the sound like gravel grinding together. "Is that so? And where will you take her, human? Do you even know what she is?" "I know enough." Do you? Vorax tilted his head, scales glinting in the crimson light. "Return what you've stolen, both the artifact and the girl, and perhaps I'll let you leave with your life." Nick's jaw tightened. Not happening. Vorax's eyes narrowed. He raised a clawed hand, signaling his guards. "Then you will die here." Time seemed to freeze. 4 weapons raised in unison. Nick calculated odds, angles, exits. Slim, suicidal, but he'd faced worse. And then salvation came from chaos. The entire station shuddered violently, throwing everyone off balance. The walls groaned, lights flickered, alarms shifted to a deeper, more urgent tone. "Station breach in Sector 7, the automated voice blared. "Containment failure imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately." Guards hesitated. Vorax cursed in his native tongue. Nick didn't wait. He grabbed Ara's hand and pulled her toward the hangars, firing 2 quick shots over his shoulder. Blaster bolts sizzled past scorching walls inches from his head. They ran, boots pounding, alarms wailing, chaos erupting all around. The docking bay lay ahead, freedom tantalizingly close. Nick risked a glance at Era. Despite everything, chains, bruises, fear. Her eyes burned with determination. She wasn't broken. She wasn't helpless. She was alive, and now she was free. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Nick Harper knew he would fight to the last breath to keep her that way. The wail of alarms followed them through Nexus's labyrinthine corridors, like the cry of a dying beast. Red lights strobed overhead, bathing everything in a blood-hued glow. The air tasted of ozone and burning metal, evidence that whatever had triggered the breach in Sector 7 was spreading. Nick Harper ran with Ara's hand clenched tightly in his, the weight of the codex secure in his belt pouch, and the pounding of his heart in his ears. Every step echoed the same mantra: Bay 17, Bay 17, get there or die trying. Behind them, the station erupted into chaos. Traders abandoned stalls, smugglers scrambled for ships, and gangs turned confusion into opportunity. Gunfire rattled in distant corridors as rival crews clashed. Smoke curled through the vents, acrid and suffocating. Nick had seen war zones quieter than this. "We'll never make it." Ara gasped, though her voice carried more determination than despair. Her violet eyes burned with defiance, even as exhaustion threatened to drag her down. "Yes, we will," Nick said through gritted teeth. "Stay with me." They skidded around a corner, nearly colliding with a patrol of security droids. Nick fired before the machines could even register them, 2 sharp shots taking down the first pair. Ara didn't hesitate. She dove for cover, snatched up one of the fallen droid's weapons, and fired a precise burst that decapitated the third. Nick blinked at her. Not bad. Lyrian nobles aren't raised to be helpless, she shot back, tossing the spent weapon aside. He almost smiled even in the midst of chaos. She wasn't just surviving, she was fighting. That realization made something stir inside him, something more dangerous than fear-hope. They pushed on, weaving through twisting passages until at last the docking bay's massive doors loomed ahead. Beyond them, Bay 17 waited. The starbound, his battered but reliable Corvette-class transport was their only salvation. But salvation never came easy. A slow, mocking clap echoed through the cavernous corridor. Nick's stomach sank. He didn't need to look to know who it was. Vorax stepped into view, his scaled form framed by flickering emergency lights. 4 guards flanked him, weapons ready. His yellow eyes glimmered with malice, his jeweled ornaments clinking as he moved with predatory grace. Impressive, the slaver hissed. You've cost me much tonight, human. My artifact, my property, my patience. His forked tongue flicked out, tasting the tension in the air. Era stiffened beside Nick, her fingers digging into his arm. But she didn't cower this time. She stepped forward, chains gone, but dignity intact. You will never own me again, Vorax. Vorax tilted his head, amused. You think this mercenary can protect you? He is nothing. A tool. And tools break. Nick raised his blaster steady. Try me. The corridor fell silent, save for the distant groans of a dying station. For a moment, the universe held its breath. Then Vorax's hand twitched, and his guards leveled their rifles. Nick's world narrowed to a single brutal calculation: 4 armed guards, Vorax himself and Ara, to protect. Bad odds. Fatal odds. But he'd faced worse. Stay behind me, he murmured. Ara's jaw tightened. I will not hide. Time fractured into fragments. The guards' weapons lit with charging energy. Nick's finger tightened on the trigger. Ara braced herself, her violet eyes fierce. And then the station shuddered violently, nearly throwing them all to the ground. The automated voice blared over the intercom, deeper and more urgent than before, containment failure spreading. All personnel, evacuate immediately. The deck pitched beneath their feet. Sparks rained from ruptured conduits. One of Vorax's guards cursed, glancing nervously at his master. The slaver snarled, torn between rage and survival. Nick didn't hesitate. He fired 2 quick shots, dropping the nearest guard. Then he seized Ara's wrist and bolted for the bay doors. Stop them! Vorax roared, his voice echoing like thunder. Blaster fire sizzled past as Nick and Ara sprinted. The docking bay controls loomed ahead like the gates of heaven. Nick slammed his hand against the panel, forcing the massive doors open just enough for them to slip through. The starbound awaited her, sleek frame scarred from countless battles, but her entry ramp lowered and ready, courtesy of Nick's remote command. Go, he shouted. Ara sprinted up the ramp, her silver hair streaming behind her like a comet's tail. Nick covered her, firing blindly over his shoulder as Vorax and his surviving guards burst into the bay. Bolts scorched the walls, one grazing so close that heat seared his cheek. Nick backed up the ramp, returning fire with every step. A guard collapsed, clutching his chest. Another's weapon exploded in his hands. Vorax himself advanced relentlessly, his yellow eyes locked on them, fury etched into every scale. You cannot escape me, Vorax bellowed, his voice rattling the hangar. Nick slammed his fist on the control panel. The ramp began to rise. The last thing he saw was Vorax's snarling face illuminated by fire and fury before the ship sealed shut. Strap in, Nick yelled, racing for the cockpit. Ara was already there, sliding into the co-pilot seat with surprising familiarity. Her slender fingers danced across the console, activating systems Nick hadn't expected her to even recognize. You've flown before, he asked, stunned. She gave a faint, almost wry smile. House Tyrvale maintained a fleet of diplomatic vessels. I was trained from childhood. Nick couldn't help a sharp grin. Glad I picked the right passenger. He punched the thrusters. The starbound roared to life, lifting from the bay floor as debris fell around them. The docking bay shook violently, alarm screeching. With a growl of effort, Nick angled the ship toward the exit and fired the engines. The starbound blasted free, just as another tremor ripped through Nexus Station. Behind them, the once mighty hub fractured, entire sections collapsing into the void. Fires erupted, debris spiraled outward, and the station's lights flickered like dying stars. In the cockpit, the proximity alarm shrieked. Nick swore under his breath. On the far side of the wreckage, a sleek, predatory vessel emerged, its weapons charging. Vorax's ship. The comm system crackled, his guttural voice filling the cockpit. Human, you have taken what is mine. Return my property, and I may grant you a quick death. Nick cut the transmission with a flick of his wrist. Not happening. He glanced at Era. Weapons, can you handle it? Her answer was immediate, her voice steady despite the fear shimmering in her eyes. Yes, she slid into the gunner station, her hands moving with confidence. Vorax flies a Talon-class hunter. Fast, heavily armed, but the ventral shielding is weaker. Nick arched a brow. How do you know that? Her lips curved faintly. Knowledge is survival in Lyrian politics. Nick grinned as he executed a sharp, evasive maneuver, the starbound responding like a living thing to his touch. Show me what you've got, princess. The first volley from Vorax's ship screamed past them close enough to rattle their hull. Ara returned fire with surgical precision, striking the hunter exactly where she had said. The enemy ship veered slightly, shields flaring. Nice shot, Nick said, banking hard toward a nearby asteroid cluster. There's a jump point 2 minutes out, if we can reach it. Another blast rocked the starbound, cutting him off. Warning lights flashed across the console. Port thruster damaged. Shields at 60%, Ura reported calmly, her fingers flying across the weapons array. Nick swore again. We need to lose him before we can jump. They wove through the asteroid field, each maneuver a razor-thin gamble between survival and destruction. Vorax pursued relentlessly, his hunter's sleek form darting like a predator among prey. Through it all, Nick became acutely aware of the woman beside him. The determination etched in her features, the way her silver hair caught the glow of passing stars, the quiet strength in her voice, it was intoxicating. Even in the middle of a fight for their lives, he found himself distracted by her presence. Behind us, she shouted, suddenly breaking his reverie. Nick yanked the ship into a tight spiral. A barrage of plasma bolts grazed their hull, sending tremors through the cabin. Warning klaxons screamed. They couldn't outrun him, not like this. We need a diversion, Nick said grimly. Ara's eyes flicked to the codex secured at Nick's belt. Her breath caught. The codex. It isn't just data, it's a key, a beacon. If activated, it could draw every sensor in the sector. Nick shot her a questioning look. Dangerous. Yes, she said, but more dangerous to do nothing. Nick didn't hesitate. He pulled the codex free, its crystalline surface shimmering with alien light. Tell me what to do. She reached out, pressing the artifact to her forehead. Blue light surged, dancing across her skin and into the codex. Patterns of energy flared alive with ancient power. She gasped, straining under the connection. Now, she whispered. Nick loaded the codex into a probe launcher and fired it into the densest part of the asteroid field. Immediately, every sensor in the area lit up with a massive energy spike. Vorax's ship veered sharply, chasing the signal like a predator scenting blood. It worked, Nick said, already plotting a course away from both Vorax and the codex. Ara slumped in her seat, drained but alive. We lost the artifact. Nick met her gaze, something fierce burning in his chest. We're alive, that's payment enough. Their eyes locked. For a moment, the chaos outside faded, and only the spark between them remained fragile, undeniable, dangerous. Vorax had been cheated, the codex was gone, and Nexus Station lay in ruins. But Nick Harper and Aratir Vale had escaped, and the galaxy would never be the same. The starbound limped through the darkness, her hull scorched, and thrusters groaning from the chase. Alarms no longer screamed, but their echoes seemed embedded in the ship's bones. Nick Harper slouched back in the pilot's seat, his knuckles white on the controls, eyes flicking between damage readouts. Every flicker of red felt like another nail in their coffin. Beside him, Ara sat silently in the co-pilot's chair. Her violet eyes stared out at the passing void, but her posture betrayed exhaustion. Her silver hair clung to her cheeks with sweat damp from the strain of channeling the codex. For a woman who had endured years in chains, she looked frighteningly fragile, and yet Nick had never seen anyone so alive. He broke the silence first. You almost killed yourself back there. Her lips quirked, but the smile was thin. Better me than both of us. Besides, I told you, The codex responds to my kind. Nick studied her profile the way her jaw tightened as she spoke. Your kind, he repeated, meaning Lyrians. She nodded slowly. We are different. Our blood carries threads of something older. A legacy, perhaps. My people believe we are descendants of the progenitors. Nick let out a low whistle. You're telling me your DNA lights up ancient tech because you're the grandkids of the galaxy's boogeymen? Her expression turned sharp, though her voice stayed calm. Not boogeymen, builders, creators. The progenitors raised countless younger species, seeded worlds with knowledge. They disappeared millennia ago, but their fingerprints remain. Their relics are power, and power breeds war. Nick leaned back, processing. It made sense in a way. The codex hadn't just been valuable because of the data. It had been valuable because of who could use it. And Vorax hadn't kept her as a pet out of perverse whim alone. He'd kept her because she was the key to something far greater. So that's why he collared you, Nick muttered. Not just to break you, but to own you. You're not just a person to him. You're a bloody key. Ara's eyes darkened. Yes, my blood, my genetics. They could unlock weapons, caches, entire fleets, perhaps even worlds. That is why I was captured. That is why my family was destroyed. Nick's brows furrowed. Destroyed. Her voice wavered, though she forced herself to remain composed. House Tyrvale opposed the exploitation of progenitor relics. We advocated restraint diplomacy. For that, Vorax struck. My ship was taken during negotiations. Since then, I have been diminished. Her hand touched her throat where the collar's scars still lingered. Nick swore softly, fingers drumming against the console. A storm of anger swelled in his chest, sharper than anything he'd felt in years. He'd been angry at wars, at commanders, at betrayals. But this was different. This was personal. You're not diminished, he said firmly. Not anymore. The words hung between them, heavier than he expected. Ara turned to look at him, truly look at him, and for a moment the cockpit felt too small. But the proximity alarm cut through the silence like a blade. Nick swore again and checked the sensors. Nothing nearby. Still his gut clenched. He trusted his instincts, and his instincts screamed danger. You said your blood's tied to this stuff, he said quickly. What about humans, the Codex? It reacted to me too, didn't it? Ayara tilted her head, curiosity flashing across her face. Perhaps. I saw resonance. When you touched it, its glow shifted. That should not be possible. Only Lyrians are meant to wield its power. Nick smirked grimly. Story of my life. Doing things I'm not supposed to. But her words struck deeper than he let show. Could it be true? Could humans share a connection with the progenitors? He remembered the way the artifact had pulsed beneath his fingers as if recognizing something. For years, humanity had been dismissed by older civilizations as upstarts, reckless children of the stars. What if they were something more? Ara leaned forward, studying him with new intensity. Tell me, Nick Harper, what are humans really? You burn so brightly, live so briefly, yet leave such chaos in your wake. Perhaps there is more to your kind than even you know. Nick's jaw tightened, though not from offense. He had no answer, only questions. He shifted in his seat. Doesn't matter right now. What matters is we're alive, and Vorax isn't breathing down our necks. But we're not safe, not yet. We need somewhere to lay low, fix the ship, figure out what's next. Ayara nodded, her composure returning. The outer rim of the Vega system. There is a trading outpost there, rough but neutral. We can find repairs, supplies, perhaps allies. Nick arched a brow. You know a lot for someone who's been chained up for 3 years. Her eyes glinted with faint amusement. A caged mind still thinks. Vorax's guards were careless with their tongues. And Lyrians? We remember. Nick chuckled, shaking his head. Remind me never to underestimate you. For the first time since he had found her, she smiled, truly smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was real, softening the harsh lines of pain and loss that had etched themselves into her face. The cockpit fell quiet again, but the silence was different now. Less heavy, almost companionable. Nick set the starbound on autopilot and leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. Exhaustion clawed at him, but his mind refused to rest. He thought of the codex of Vorax's fury of the curator, waiting somewhere in the shadows. He thought of Era chained like an animal, yet standing now as a woman of fire and grace. And he thought of the strange pulse he'd felt when he touched the codex. The galaxy was shifting, and for the first time in years, Nick Harper wasn't just a mercenary chasing pay. He was part of something bigger, something ancient, dangerous, and unstoppable. He glanced at Era again at the way her eyes still burned despite exhaustion. She caught his gaze and neither looked away. In that fragile silence, one truth crystallized: they weren't just fugitives anymore. They were the spark of a storm that would shake the stars. The starbound glided through the void like a wounded predator, her hull groaning with every adjustment of the thrusters. Inside the cockpit, the hum of damaged systems filled the silence. Nick Harper kept his gaze locked on the starfield, but his mind was far from calm. He knew the curator would be expecting an update. He also knew the truth: the codex was gone. Vorax was hunting, and he had an alien aristocrat on his ship instead of a relic worth a fortune. It was time to face the music. He set the autopilot, rose from his chair, and gestured to Ara. "Stay put, I need to make a call." She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "To your employer." Nick nodded. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. He could sense her distrust, but there was no helping it. The curator would find out one way or another. Better to control the story than let someone else deliver it first. He made his way to the comm alcove, a narrow chamber lined with encrypted relays. Sitting before the terminal, he keyed in the access codes. The holographic display flickered to life, shrouded in static. At last, the curator appeared, his features as always obscured by digital distortion, his voice modulated to a cold, detached timbre. "Harper," the voice purred, "I trust you have the codex." Nick leaned back casually, though tension twisted his gut. There were complications. Nexus went up in flames. I had to jettison the codex as a decoy. Saved my skin, but the artifact's lost. A long silence followed. The curator's holographic outline flickered, but Nick felt the weight of his gaze even through distortion. "Unfortunate," the curator said at last, though not entirely unexpected. "Nexus was unstable. Still, you retrieved something else, did you not?" Nick's blood chilled. "What do you mean?" The curator chuckled softly. "Please, Mr. Harper, my sources are thorough. Vorax possessed not only the codex, but a Lyrian noble, Aratir Vale, pure-blooded, essential to unlocking progenitor systems. And you, being the man you are, could not resist playing the hero." Nick's fist clenched at his sides. He had never told the curator about her, which meant the job had been a setup from the beginning. "You knew," he growled. "You sent me there for both." "Of course," the curator replied smoothly. "But I see no codex, and yet you have the girl. Deliver her to the coordinates I am transmitting, and I will consider our contract fulfilled." Nick slammed his fist against the bulkhead, teeth bared. "She's not cargo. She's a person. A person worth more than you can imagine, Harper. Don't develop a conscience now. It doesn't suit you." The transmission cut without warning, leaving Nick staring at the empty air. A sharp beep from his wrist device signaled new coordinates had arrived. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. "Problems with your employer." Nick spun, hand darting for his sidearm, but froze when he saw Era standing in the doorway. She had showered. Her damp silver hair clung to her shoulders, and she wore one of his spare shirts, its fabric falling almost to her knees. The sight rattled him more than the curator's threats. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough." Her voice was calm, but her eyes blazed. "Your curator wants you to deliver me like a prize animal. Will you?" Nick met her gaze steady. "No, I'm a mercenary, not a slaver. I've done a lot of questionable things in my life, but selling someone into chains isn't one of them." Relief softened to her features. She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the deck. "Then what will we do?" Before he could answer, the proximity alarm screamed. Nick rushed back to the cockpit, Ara close behind. The sensors painted a picture he didn't want to see: a ship closing fast, its signature unmistakable. "Vorax." "That's impossible," Nick muttered. "No one could have tracked us through that jump." But the evidence was clear. Ara's face paled. "How?" Nick's hand went instinctively to the base of his neck. He felt it then, a hard lump beneath the skin. His stomach dropped. "Tracking device," he growled. The curator must have implanted it during our last meeting. Ara laid a hand over his. Can you remove it? Not without proper equipment. Nick powered up the engines, grimacing as the damaged thrusters protested. We need to run. But she shook her head. We can't outrun him. Not like this. We need another plan. Nick's mind raced. There was one place. Dangerous, chaotic, but protected by law older than Vorax's greed. There's a smuggler's moon in this system, Helios. Neutral territory under guild protection. If we reach it, we'll have sanctuary. Ara nodded, her expression fierce. Then let's go. The starbound limped toward Helios, each minute a lifetime. Vorax's hunter pursued, but at the edge of the system, the laws of the mercenary guild came into play. Even Vorax would hesitate to violate them. The moon loomed ahead, a cratered world carved hollow, lit by 1,000 neon scars. Helios wasn't beautiful, but it was alive. A den of thieves, mercenaries, and smugglers bound together by unspoken rules. Sanctuary for those who could pay. Nick opened a channel. Helios Control. This is Nick Harper on the Starbound requesting emergency docking under Guild Article 7. A long pause, then a clipped reply, transmit credentials. Nick sent his mercenary guild ID. Another pause, then Starbound. You are cleared for Bay 42. Sanctuary request logged. Representatives will meet you on arrival. As they docked, Nick checked his sidearm and activated the ship's security locks. Ara emerged from the storage locker wearing a jumpsuit and boots, her silver hair tied back. She looked every inch the aristocrat, still despite the borrowed clothes. Better, Nick asked. She arched a brow. Less distracting. He smirked. Debatable. The ramp lowered. Waiting at the bottom were 3 figures in guild gray and red. 2 were armored guards. The third, a tall human woman with cropped black hair and a cybernetic eye, stepped forward with a smirk. Harper, she drawled. When they said you'd invoked Article 7, I had to see it myself. You must be truly desperate. Nick stiffened. Hello, Maya. Still running security for this rock. Guild Marshal now, she corrected, tapping the insignia on her shoulder. Times change. Her cybernetic eye whirred softly as it focused on Era. And who's your blue friend, Rare Find? Nick stepped slightly in front of Ara. She's under my protection. Interesting, Maya murmured. Then she gestured. Come on, we should talk somewhere private. They followed her through Helios's bustling corridors, where alien merchants hawked exotic wares and mercenaries drank away fortunes. Ara kept close, her eyes wide with quiet awe at the cacophony of sights and sounds. Nick stayed alert. He knew Helios well enough to recognize every shadow as a threat. Inside Maya's office, the door sealed behind them. She leaned against her desk, arms crossed. So, you've pissed off Vorax, blown Nexus to hell, and walked in here with a Lyrian aristocrat on your arm. Care to explain? Nick gave her the short version, omitting details about the codex. Maya listened, expression unreadable. When he finished, she sighed. You always did have a talent for finding trouble, she said. Vorax is already in system. He's waiting for you. I can arrange repairs, maybe get that tracking device out of your neck, but... She hesitated, her eye flicking to Ara. But what? Nick pressed. There's been chatter, Maya said. Someone's hunting Lyrians. Not random slavers, organized, systematic. And now you show up with one of the last pure-blooded nobles. That puts a very big target on your back. Ara's face went pale. My people. It's bad, Maya confirmed. And I don't know if I can protect you. Vorax has deep pockets, deeper than mine. Nick's gut twisted. He knew that tone. He'd heard it before, back when Maya had been his partner, his ally, maybe something more. She was already rationalizing. Maya, he said softly. Don't. Her lips tightened. I'm sorry, Nick. The price was too high. Vorax wants you alive. Both of you. I can't turn that down. The door behind them hissed open. Armed guild security flooded in, weapons raised. Ara gasped, stepping back. Nick's blaster was in his hand instantly, but Maya raised hers first. Don't make this harder, she said. Drop it. Nick's jaw clenched. He looked at Ara, then back at Maya. The betrayal burned worse than any wound. You always were good at survival, he said coldly. Guess some things never change. Maya's eyes flickered, but she didn't lower her weapon. Take them both, she ordered. As the guards closed in, Nick's instincts screamed. He tightened his grip on Ara's hand. Now he shouted. Chaos exploded in the office. The room plunged into chaos. Nick disarmed one guard with a brutal elbow strike, yanking the rifle free and using the man as a shield. Stun bolts sizzled past scorching walls. Era moved with startling precision, diving for cover, her slender fingers snatching Nick's discarded sidearm. She fired upward, shattering the overhead lights. Darkness swallowed the office. Here her hand found his in the pitch black. Before Nick could question, a section of wall slid open with a hiss. A hidden panel. "This way," Ara whispered. They slipped through as Maya cursed behind them, shouting orders. The panels sealed, cutting off the shouts and weapons fire. Only the hum of emergency lights lit the narrow tunnel ahead. Nick's breath came heavy. "You knew about this." "Resistance safe houses," she replied, voice steady despite the pounding of their flight. "I noticed the markers while you slept. Helios has its secrets if you know where to look." They raced through twisting passages, descending deeper beneath the moon's surface. The din of pursuit faded behind them. Finally, they reached an unmarked door. Ara pressed her palm to a concealed scanner. With a mechanical groan, the door slid open, revealing a chamber alive with activity. Dozens of Lyrians turned as the pair entered Scientist Fighter's children. The Resistance. An elder with deep indigo skin approached, eyes widening at the sight of Ara. "By the progenitors," he breathed, "a tear veil lives." Ara bowed her head. "Elder Torin, my father spoke of you often." The old Lyrian bowed deeply in return. "Your family's loss has shaken us to the core. But your survival, it changes everything." His gaze shifted to Nick. "And you bring a human with you." Nick straightened under the elder's scrutiny, but Ara's voice carried warmth. "He freed me from Vorax. He has risked his life for mine. He has my complete trust." Torrin studied Nick with ancient eyes, then nodded. "Then he has ours." They were ushered into a secure chamber where a holographic star map dominated the room. Torrin gestured, symbols flickering into focus. "This," he said gravely, "is the progenitor sanctuary world." Nick felt a chill. The coordinates hung in the air like destiny itself. Ara stepped closer, her violet eyes shining. "So my father was right. The sanctuary exists." Torrin inclined his head. "Before his capture, he entrusted the location to us. We lacked a pure-blooded tear veil to unlock its defenses. Until now." Nick frowned. "So you're saying we can just walk in?" "Not quite." Torrin's voice hardened. "The sanctuary requires two bloodlines to awaken Lyrian and another." He looked directly at Nick. "Human." Nick blinked. "Excuse me?" Torrin zoomed the hologram, displaying genetic charts. "Our research suggests humans share a marker stronger even than Lyrians. It is no coincidence your species has spread so quickly, adapting where others falter. We believe humans may be direct descendants of the progenitors seated on Earth as a safeguard." The room fell silent. Nick stared, his mind racing. He remembered the codex glowing under his touch, the pulse that had seemed to recognize him. "That's insane," he muttered. "Is it Torrin pressed? You burn brighter, live shorter, adapt faster. Traits of builders who once spanned galaxies. The consortium fears this truth, that awakening the progenitors will confirm humanity as their true heirs." Ara's hand brushed Nick's arm. "That is why Vorax kept me. Why the curator hunts us both. Together our bloodlines are the key." Nick exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "So what, you want me to help wake up a bunch of ancient gods and hope they're friendly?" Torrin's voice was iron. "Not gods, people. But people who could end consortium tyranny. Already your curator, Commander Voss, once of Earth's colonial defense force, moves to destroy the sanctuary. He fears the truth about your kind." Nick stiffened at the name. Memories flashed, a young officer eager for glory, Voss's voice promising him purpose. He had been working for the same man all along. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. Torrin's gaze softened. "I know this is much to bear, but time is short. The curator has resources beyond imagining. If he reaches the sanctuary first, he will erase it, and with it, any hope of freedom." Nick met Ara's eyes. She looked at him not with pleading, but with steady trust. "I'm in," he said simply. Relief rippled through the room. Plans unfolded quickly. The Resistance had a stealth vessel, the Harbinger, capable of slipping past consortium patrols. Nick and Ara would travel with a small team to the sanctuary world, their combined DNA unlocking its secrets. But danger loomed even in safety. Torn's medics examined Nick, scanning the implant in his neck. What they found chilled him to the bone. It is not merely a tracker, the doctor explained, holding up a vial. Inside, a tiny fragment of metallic crystal pulsed faintly. It contains progenitor DNA. The curator implanted it in you, Harper. You have been his experiment. Revulsion surged through Nick. He touched the back of his neck, shuddering. Get it out. Already done, the doctor said. We removed it while you were being briefed. The neural sedative has only just worn off. Nick exhaled shakily. He hadn't even noticed. He'd been used, manipulated, violated without ever realizing it. But Ara's hand closed over his. You are more than what he tried to make you. You chose differently. The words steadied him. Torn returned their focus to the map. We must depart soon. Vorax and the curator will not be far behind. But with you two, we have what we need. Together, Lyrian and human can awaken the progenitors. Nick looked at Ara. She met his gaze with a faint smile, eyes shimmering with both fear and hope. Guess we're really in this now, he murmured. Together, she whispered. For the first time, Nick felt something he hadn't in years. Not just survival, not just duty, but purpose. They would find the sanctuary. They would awaken the past. And in doing so, they might just reshape the future.